generation is the generation of the hippies, the generation of the civil rights movement, of so many things that changed the face of America. And yet, when those exciting things were happening, I was behind cloister walls, very unaware of what was happening in the world. So the civil rights movement came, matured, slowed down, without my participating in it very much. When I finally left religious life and started doing images of people like Dorothy Day and Oscar Romero, I knew that I needed to be re-educated, that I knew a lot about ancient church history, that I knew a lot about theology, that I knew a lot about things that were important, yes, but not much about my own time or my own country or the struggles for justice that were happening all around me. And I made it a point of listening very carefully to the people of faith that I now found myself surrounded by, and what they knew of holy men and holy women in the struggles of our day. One of these was Martin Luther King Jr., who for me until that time was a name and not anything else. They suggested that I paint Martin Luther King. For me, growing up in the Catholic ghetto of the 40s and 50s, thinking of Protestants mainly as people who beat you up on the way to school because you were a Catholic or Russian Orthodox, painting a Protestant was a real big jump, and here's somebody asking me to paint a Baptist minister. And secondly, growing up in rural Colorado, I had probably seen 3 or 4 black people in my whole life before I went away to the cloister. So I didn't even know exactly how to paint someone of African American heritage. I agreed that I would look into the icon. I began reading his writings and the facts of his life. And then thinking, okay, if I paint him, how in the world do I take this tradition of iconography that begins with this green sub-painting for flesh and then adds ochres and other colors on top of it? How do I do a black person? Well, I had never really looked at a black person. You know, looking at me, hearing me say this could sound ludicrous, or like, what planet did you fall off of? Well, I fell off of the planet of a cloister after growing up in the mountains. And I got on a bus in San Francisco, and I rode a bus for 8 hours, very carefully trying to look at black people without staring to see, okay, what pigments do I need to mix to make your skin authentically the way it is? So all of these things go into it technically. And then when I start designing it, all of the images I painted up to that point wore these flowing Greek robes, full of folds that you could cover with highlights. What do you do with a business suit? How do you make the same kind of iconographic light dance across a business suit, which if it is all wrinkled like a Greek toga, a Greek himation, is basically something somebody slept in. It looks like a bum has been wearing it. Many things I had to translate to do him, in other words. And then ancient saints, you know, they sit on top of columns for 40 years and they pray, and they go off to the desert, they do these amazing ascetical feats, they fight with dragons, the legends of St. George and others, they're martyred by lions in the Colosseum, they fast all their lives. Okay, here's a saint, a holy person who dies in the later part of the 20th century. What are the symbols of his martyrdom? You can't put lions with him. He wasn't thrown to the lions. Well, for him, it became, the image that I came up with was the number he was given for his mugshot. That is somebody who was doing non-violent resistance to injustice. He was arrested over and over again. That was part of his martyrdom. So that was the symbolism that went into this image. A quotation, "How long will justice be crucified and truth buried?" It has been an incredibly controversial image. And not for the reasons that it was hard for me in the beginning to paint it, that he was a Protestant, but that he was unfaithful to his wife. And so there was a conservative Catholic magazine that once lumped him together with Harvey Milk and described all of my work as pornographic because I dared to paint an adulterer and a homosexual. On the other hand, apart from these people who zero in on sexual lives, thousands and thousands of people have loved this icon, and it's become part of Martin Luther King Day marches and things like that. Again, a saint that comes from the midst of the people, lived the life of the people, not going off to the desert, not going off to a cloister, but finding holiness in the middle of struggles of the 20th century.